Hi everyone. This month I'm speaking to Conor, and Conor's research is about how power influences decision making
and behaviour.
Most of us are used to large projects blowing out in terms of cost, but you would argue that that's not just an accident, that that's kind of built into the decision making issues we have at that level?
It is, yeah, and it's an important issue because it's not just limited to the project management sphere, because big infrastructure projects affect us all. It's because of the way people in power make decisions.
What is the issue when it comes to politicians or people in power making decisions about large infrastructure projects?
The issue is the way, and this is the journey for me as well, which was a fascinating part of my PhD. But one of the things I found is that senior people don't use much data at all for decision making.
Okay. So if politicians, and I can kind of understand that they may not be able to absorb all that information, but they must have people who work for them that do.
Exactly, yes. So one of the ways politicians deal with the fact that they don't have time, and lack of time and issue complexity are big determinants of whether you use what's called heuristics or shortcuts to make decisions. One of the heuristics they use is, I get somebody I trust, I'll outsource it to them. She'll go through it with a fine tooth comb and tell me what I need to do about it. The issue is that those people are also flat chat,
right,
and they're spinning lots of different plates.
Yeah.
But one of the heuristics that people will use is, particularly politicians, is self-interest, which is like, I've got a year to go to the next election.
Yep.
Well, is the community clamouring for this? Is it on the front page of the Herald Sun?
Right.
And so the answer to that was no. Okay, well then, would there be much resistance to this policy? So, for instance, this policy in particular was looking at time of use and distance travelled,
Yep,
rather than the standard postage stamp approach, and so it would have created winners and losers in the electorate. So if you're out an MP and you're out on 40 k's out from the CBD, and you've got people commuting in and out of the city, your electorate's going to be annoyed with you.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, rationally fine, but for me, no, I can't do this.
In a way, that is a type of rational logic, though. The real politics situation of an electorate that will.
You're right. So there is a thing. There is a phrase called ecological rationality, which is a fancy way of saying it's rational in this situation. We have to be really careful about all that, because you can end up producing some. You can even get involved in unethical behaviour because it makes sense right here, right now, with my cohort. But yes, people justify what they do. Nobody's irrational to themselves. It's perfectly rational.
Right.
It's just that if you took a business case, in this case, which would have reduced traffic potentially significantly, particularly around the CBD, where we got congestion and pollution issues, that just would not. It's just not. In fact, the Premier he dismissed it about 18 months ago, just very quickly. It's not going to happen.
So there are great examples of cost overruns and projects that look good on paper. Sydney Opera House?
Sydney Opera House, we held the record at one stage. We were 1,400 times the original budget.
Wow. Olympic Games?
Olympic Games, almost every Olympic Games is between 30 and 50% what they originally pitched for. So those big kind of glamour projects, they have a terrible track record.
So recently the Victorian Premier has had to cancel the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
So the idea that the Commonwealth Games is a money-losing venture is not new, but actually pulling the plug at that late stage is.
That's very unusual. Okay. Yeah, what's often the case is that political decision makers get locked in, or they get hemmed in because they've committed to do something, and so as the costs escalate, and they escalate for a number of different reasons. One of which is the original business case was highly unlikely and highly optimistic. You get a kind of overcommitment or a sunk cost commitment, which is, well, hang on, we're kind of halfway through this, so it's almost cheaper to keep going than it is to unwind it. And then what do you do at a half-built stadium? So that's very difficult and really unusual for politicians to go, no, I'm not doing this. I mean, I'm not across the politics of it, But from a major project perspective, that was really unusual. I mean, I actually think it was a good thing.
If we are prone, or politicians and leaders are prone to making irrational decisions, talk about resistance and the idea that
Yes.
there could be people that would help them make better decisions.
So one of the things you don't want to do is be Robinson Crusoe when it comes to pushing back, because. Let me frame this in general. I think people in public service, generally speaking, we get the most competent, the most hardworking, and the most dedicated people around. So I'm not. I don't have an ideology which is I'm not a Marxist, and so I'm not against the ruling elite. I think generally speaking, in general, the people in those positions are trying to do the right thing, and they work hard, and they are skilled and competent. So. But they can't be left unaccountable, because there are some short-term incentives, such as the next electoral cycle, which will drive perverse behaviour. In order to stop that, I think what we need is more resistance. But you do not want to be the whistleblower. I know it's not going to sound well, but the track record for being a whistleblower is not very good, because you become socially isolated. You get under huge pressure. Your health suffers. Relationships suffer. Your employment generally takes a hit. Mm-hmm. It's a bad place to be. And in fact, people in power want that, because you then become the public execution. You then get hung up as, if any of you want to resist, this is what happens.
Right.
And so in
terms of changing behaviour,
yeah,
in terms of getting better behaviour,
yes.
What do we do in terms of either training our politicians or those who work for them to say there's a better way of making decisions in the long term?
Well, what a politician ought to do, and that's a great point you make, if we're training politicians, we ought to train them to look for more resistance, not less.
Okay. In a way, that's saying, I don't want to hear bad news, but I should look for bad news?
Absolutely. And you should deliberately set it up so you have somebody who can call you into a room and go, mate, no. And they'd go straight to the board or to the CEO and tap them on the shoulder, and they go, look, I'm throwing a red flag on this.
And in the end, it does require a type of politician who is brave enough to ask for bad news or resistance.
Yeah, I think so there's resistance in two ways. So if we had leaders who were searching for contradictory evidence, or who were being counselled by people who had their long-term interests at heart, I think we would get better decisions. What they don't need is a cheer squad. They actually need people counterbalancing, saying, this is a bad idea, and here's why. And also, now there's much said about psychological safety, and it's a difficult area, but basically the politician, he or she needs to set up a group where the people feel comfortable bringing them bad news and telling them what should be fixed.
So are people sometimes set up to fail and to be reset, and to set up to fail and to be reset?
It happens all the time. It was a bit of a joke in the project community around the NBN some years ago. Like, most people got a phone call to go, oh, we got rid of all, getting rid of all those guys were hopeless, but we want you to come in and pick it up. And you go, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
And so there's a political will to be seen to tidy it up and to fix it. But in each case, you get the same dynamic, which is, we're only going to put up what we think we can get away with, not what the project actually needs.
Right.
And so it's an inability to tell the truth at its most fundamental, which is, so you get an instrumental use of language in business cases, which is, I'll put up a business case and I'll put up a proposition which will get me started at least, rather than being frank and putting out a business case which is what you genuinely think will happen. And now most politicians would say, well, you're being naive. And I would go, well, not in the long term.
Conor Wynne, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.